Hi there, Mr. Traeger here. This is our first vodcast in health education, and what a better topic to start with is the concept of health. We're going to talk about what health is, we're going to define it, and we're also going to talk about the term wellness and what that means. So, what is health? Health is comprised of five different components. The first component is what's called physical health, and most people are familiar with physical health, and what physical health means is how your body looks or how your body works. So it has to do with our physical appearances, but it also has to do with how our internal body works, our skeletal system, our muscular system, our internal organs. Now, how do we keep ourselves healthy physically? Well, of course, we have exercise programs. We have sports that people get involved in, whether it's recreational sports, whether it's competitive sports. We also have to take a look at nutrition. What kind of fuel are we putting in our body to keep the organs, to keep our bones, to keep our muscles strong and healthy? The second component is mental health. Now, a lot of people are familiar with mental health, and we look at mental health in the viewpoint of mental illness a lot of times. What mental health means is literally how we think and process information. It's literally how our brain thinks. How do we bring information into our brain? What do we do with that information when it's in there? How do we store it? How do we retrieve it? How do we recall it? All those pieces of information have to go somewhere and be processed in a certain way, and that's what we call mental health. When we have a mental illness, what happens is usually there's a breakdown in a process somewhere. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's basically where a link in the brain or a pathway for a traumatic event gets broken, and that event never ever gets solved. That crisis continues to happen over and over again, even though the crisis is no longer happening. And that's what we call a mental illness. There's a breakdown in how the brain is actually functioning. Now, Einstein here is saying, what are you thinking? But in mental health, we actually take a look at more how are you thinking than the what. And then obviously we want to keep the gears turning in our brain. Our brain, although it's not made of muscle tissue, it works very much like a muscle where the more we use it, the more information we learn, the better and more effective, the more efficient our brain actually functions. The third component is social health. And social health is simply how we interact with the world around us. Now, with social media, with our friends, with texting, with the internet, with email, it's changed the whole dynamic in how we interact and communicate with other people. But social health isn't just how we handle friendships, it's also how we interact with our family. It's how we interact with a boss if we have a job. It's how we interact with a teacher at school. It's how we interact with a coach. It's how we interact with a store employee. You're at a grocery store. You can't find the spaghetti noodles. What do you do? Are you able to go up and ask somebody? Are you able to hold a door for someone, be polite, say hi? Those are all things that constitute social health. And then obviously social health plays a big role in our friendships. How do we deal with romantic relationships? How do we deal with our friends? How do we deal with drama? How much drama are we involved in? How much drama do we allow to continue? Those are all part of social health. How do we deal with friendships when you're upset with each other? You and a friend are having a difficult time and you're angry with maybe something that she said. How do you deal with that? That's all part of social health. How do we process that information? What do we do with it? And then, of course, outlets, Facebook, we have Pinterest, we have blogs, we have web pages, you have YouTube out there. There's all kinds of different things out there in terms of how we interact with people, not only locally in our communities and in our schools, but really across the world. How do we use these tools to interact with other people? The next component is what we call emotional health. And emotional health is simply how we express our feelings. Now, a lot of people will tie emotional health and mental health together, thinking they're the same thing. But in reality, mental health is how we process those feelings, and emotional health is how we express those feelings. So, how do we express things like depression when we're sad, when we're dealing with grief, when we're dealing with emotional pain? How do we how do we how often are we happy? Do we try to be happy? Do we look for opportunities to be happy? Do we choose to be happy? Those kinds of things. What about anger? When we're upset about something, maybe it's justified that we're angry. Maybe someone did something legitimately that makes us angry, and it's justified. How do we handle that? How do we deal with maybe times when we really shouldn't overreact. Maybe we just got a short temper, and someone just innocently sort of set us off. How do we deal with those times when we're angry or we're aggressive? And then how do we deal with things like fear, embarrassment, shame, insecure? All those types of things. When we feel those types of emotions, how do we handle that? That's all part of what emotional health is. And then lastly is spiritual health. And spiritual health doesn't get a whole lot of attention these days, and a lot of people don't look at it as maybe a legitimate part of our health, but it actually is. What spiritual health is having a sense of inner peace and contentment. Does my life have meaning and worth? That's kind of what the underlying question is with the spiritual health component. Now, a lot of people will look at religion as a way to maintain or to build their spiritual health, and it's really a very common way and it's a very effective way, and it's something that most people tie to the idea of spiritual health, but it's not necessarily the only way that people get that sense of inner peace or contentment. For example, a lot of people use nature as a way to gain a sense of maybe worth or maybe a sense of peace. They look at the beauty in the world. They look at maybe a sunset in this case, or they appreciate the seasons, those kinds of things. Some people use exercise, taking a long run on a beach, for example, going for a walk. A lot of people talk about experiencing like a runner's high when they run long distances and they get to a point where they just get in the zone and suddenly they're overwhelmed with this sense of peace and this sense of self-confidence. And that's another example of what people do to gain the sense of spiritual health. And then we obviously have things like meditation. Now, for example, this guy, I don't think I could even cross my legs that way. But basically what meditation is any time that you take time for yourself in a quiet area and you basically just allow your thoughts to quiet. That's pretty much what meditation is. Sometimes people do that through exercise. They go for a walk and they just kind of decompress. A lot of times I use the analogy of someone when people are swimming in a pool, and everybody gets out of the pool. It takes a little bit of time for the water to calm down. It doesn't calm down right away, but then after about 5 or 10 minutes, all of a sudden the water is real clear, real glassy because the waves have had a chance to settle down, and that's kind of what meditation is. And so a lot of people use these different forms of practices in order to achieve that sense of contentment, that sense of inner peace. So, health is a mixture of these five components: physical, social, mental, emotional, spiritual. And that leads us to the next term, wellness. What is wellness? We might have heard of wellness programs or this term wellness before. What does it really mean? Well, what I want to do is look at wellness as like an equalizer, like on a stereo system, or in this case, in a phone. We look here, as these lines move, we see things change within the bars of music that are being played on this phone. So you'll see that the bars were rising higher when the opposite lifted the line a little bit. As he makes these lines squiggly, you can see the change and how all these bars rise and fall. And that's kind of what wellness is. If all these little bars of music would represent the different components of health, as we interact with the world around us, it's going to change the different levels that are inside of us, physically, mentally, socially, etc. So let's take a look at our health like an equalizer. So I've drawn here a box with these what we'll call little dials. We have physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual, and we'll see that each of these colored lines are at a different level. Physically, we could say this person maybe is an athlete. They keep themselves in pretty good shape. We could say that they're not really doing that hot in school. They have a lot of friends. They're pretty social. Emotionally, they're pretty stable, not super positive, but not depressed. And spiritually, they're doing okay. Maybe they're content and happy with where they are in life. All their needs are being met. They're being taken care of. Haven't really been faced with the realities of who am I and why am I here, that kind of stuff. But if we notice, all these lines are at a different place. And what we would need to do if this were a music type of an equalizer or soundboard is we would have to turn all these dials and get all of these lines moving and to a level so that we have the perfect sound. And so that's really what wellness is. is turning these dials so that we can get all of these areas balanced. And that's the key term that we want to remember for this whole concept of wellness is balance. Now notice that these arrows aren't perfect. It's not like you could draw a straight line over the top of them and they're going to be absolutely perfect. We see that, mentally this is still tough. Maybe they're not getting, straight A's, but B's and C's now instead of D's and F's. Here, emotionally doing better, but not perfect. Same thing with spiritual. Socially, we're still doing very well. Physically, we're still doing very well. And that's because we can't maintain a perfect level of health all the time. There's just too many things that happen to us on a daily basis that we have to react to. And so there's no way that we can be perfect in all these areas. And that's a very important component to understand, is that wellness isn't about perfection. Wellness is about keeping things in balance. So when we start to notice things getting out of whack, what we need to do is turn those dials sooner than later and trying to get those back into balance so that we're not all out of whack. For example, probably socially, that's a pretty important thing for this particular person. Having friends, girlfriend, boyfriend, all those kinds of things. It also looks like maybe sports would be a pretty important thing for this person. But what happens to these two things if they don't make good grades? Well, mom and dad could ground them, and then their social health goes way down because now they're not allowed to have their phone anymore. They can't hang out with their friends until their grades come up, and they may find themselves ineligible for the football team or the volleyball team, all because they let this one thing get out of whack. What about emotionally? What if emotionally they're way out of whack? Is that going to impact how we interact with people? Is that going to impact how we feel in terms of meaning of life and who am I? Is that going to have an impact on how well I'm able to think about my classes and the amount of time I spend studying if I'm angry all the time or if I'm depressed all the time? So each one of these areas has a direct influence on the other ones. And if we don't keep them in balance, then we deal with consequences like mom and dad taking over our soundboard for us, and they start turning those dials to get things back into balance. And then what mom and dad will likely do is over time start to give you the controls back again, and then they'll take a look and see how well you're managing your dials. And if they start to see that you're not managing your dials well again, they'll take over the soundboard again, and then they'll have to do it again. And that's usually not something that we like to do, especially as we're getting older and wanting more responsibility. We want more independence. So the idea here is understanding that we've got to keep these 5 components balanced. Not perfect, but balanced. So what is the definition of wellness? Wellness means keeping the 5 components balanced: physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual. Keeping them balanced, recognizing when we see some of those areas getting out of whack, we can start to turn those dials and bring them back into balance. So health, combination of spiritual, emotional, social, mental, and physical health, and wellness is keeping those 5 components balanced. So that's going to be the foundation of our class. We're going to be learning different techniques and strategies and pieces of information about how to keep all these things balanced and how we can start to take over our soundboards and be able to become healthy, responsible, independent young people.